This episode of Military Matters is brought to you by Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes provides independent news and information to the U.S. military community, including active duty service members, DoD civilians, veterans, contractors, and their families. Unique among Department of Defense authorized news outlets, Stars and Stripes is governed by the principles of the First Amendment. No slants, no agendas, just the news. Go to stripes.com and see the difference for yourself. That's stripes.com. Use promo code PODCAST. Get 50% off your digital subscription. Use promo code PODCAST. Get 50% off your digital subscription. Go to stripes.com now. This episode is also brought to you by International Auto Logistics. Go to pcsmypov.com to get all of the information you'll need on storing and picking up your vehicle. Or check out the just launched IAL mobile app. Just search for PCS My POV in the Apple Store or on Google Play. Stay tuned after the show to hear about author Max Brooks' upcoming book, Devolution. Militaries have long had to contend not only with extreme environments, hostile enemies, but also diseases. Every ailment has found its way into the ranks of the military power of the time. History has shown us Roman soldiers returning from campaigns in Mesopotamia around 190 AD bringing back with them smallpox, or as it was known then as Antonine Plague after the Roman emperor. And today the coronavirus is taking its toll within the Defense Department. DoD schools in Italy have been closed, sports tournaments in the Pacific canceled, and military exercises have been called off or scaled back. PCS transfers to South Korea have been suspended and travel restrictions imposed. You're listening to this podcast because you want to know more about what is popularly called coronavirus. It feels like there's a lot of information about it and there's no information about it. So what is the coronavirus? What does it look like if you have it? And what does this virus have to do with information warfare? How can you do your part in what the World Health Organization has declared a pandemic? I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Desmon Farris.
All that and more on this special edition of Military Matters.
Unless you have been living under a rock, you have undoubtedly heard about the coronavirus. It's all over the internet, on every newspaper and magazine. Every talking head on television is talking about the coronavirus.
The virus itself is called SARS-CoV-2. SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. You probably remember the SARS outbreak from 2002 that was also all over the news. This is called SARS-CoV-2 because it's very similar to the 2002 SARS virus. SARS-1 and 2 belong to the coronavirus family. Corona comes from the Latin word for halo. In this case, it refers to the tiny little crown-like spikes on the surface of the virus as seen from top down when you're looking through a microscope. Three-dimensionally, the virus is covered in those little spikes. Those tiny little spikes are protein spikes that allow the virus to attach itself to the inside of your respiratory system. Once there, the virus gets to work replicating itself and spreading into your mucus, which now you're in turn spreading everywhere.
We're trying to figure out exactly the mechanism of this virus.
That's Dr. Kamal Kalsi. He's an emergency room doctor working in New Jersey and New York. He's an expert in disaster medicine and also a U.S. Army physician. Dr. Kalsi will not be speaking on behalf of or as a representative of the Army, but he does bring his vast experience to this conversation.
It seems that it starts to replicate heavily within the lung tissue. It causes, at least on X-ray or CT, sort of this patchy ground glass type infiltrate, again, on the X-ray and CAT scans. So it looks like a bad pneumonia. It looks like maybe almost like an ARDS type of picture, acute respiratory distress, where your body mounts this huge inflammatory response in response to the infection. And sometimes the inflammatory response is what actually gets you even sicker and prevents you from oxygenating, and you become hypoxic and then you die.
The coronavirus family is actually a pretty chill group for the most part. Most of the viruses in that family are relatively harmless. Again, for the most part, they account for a quarter of all the colds that we get. The coronavirus family is a diverse one. Some viruses in this family live in humans, and others live in animals. Where things get weird is when a coronavirus that lives within the animal world mutates and makes the jump to humans. The 2002 SARS and 2012 MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, were both jumps from an animal to a human. Evidence is pointing to this SARS-CoV-2 also being connected to a jump from an animal to a human. So SARS-CoV-2 is the virus. Now, if you contract the virus and develop the symptoms, you now have COVID-19. So the virus is called SARS-CoV-2. The disease it causes is called COVID-19 or COVID-19. That stands for coronavirus disease discovered in 2019. It doesn't have a distinguishing name like Wuhan virus or China death like the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome had. Calling it COVID-19 was an attempt to keep from stigmatizing the disease. Chinese people are not carriers, neither are people from Wuhan. Also, steering clear of naming the disease after a region or animal prevents folks from thinking, well, I haven't touched that animal or I haven't been to Wuhan, so I'm good, right? Before it was named, it was called the novel coronavirus, which literally means new coronavirus or 2019 nCoV. When we say coronavirus is killing people, that's like saying the Smith family is killing people, when in fact it's not the entire Smith family, just one guy, Billy Smith. In this case, Billy Smith is SARS-CoV-2.
So you get SARS-CoV-2 and you die a horribly painful death, right? Well, no, not exactly. You see, you can get the coronavirus and develop 0 symptoms. Congrats, you're not sick. You have the virus, but you're good. In other people, they can develop flu-like symptoms.
The first week of infection for most people will be very, very benign. I mean, you're talking cough, congestion, maybe a sore throat, body aches. You might feel tired, and you may or may not develop a fever. And if that's all you get and feeling that way, please, for the love of God, do not go to the ER.
Going to the ER will eat up precious time a doctor needs to spend working with patients with life-threatening symptoms. You'll also be exposing other people at the ER to your disease.
You know, if it's just a mild cold or flu-like symptoms that you're experiencing, 97% of the public will be, according to the data, will be just fine. But it seems that a portion of those people will then, after the first 5 days, go on to more serious illness. And so those people will start to develop a more severe cough, high fevers, they'll start getting short of breath, they may develop chest pain, and they'll have sort of more of a pneumonia type of picture. And they're the ones that will potentially go into acute respiratory distress and acute respiratory failure in the second week. So if you start to feel short of breath, or you start to feel chest pain, you feel like you're starting to get very, very sick, then I think you should follow up with your, go see your doctor right away. But if you're just having mild symptoms, I think the best thing to do is to self-isolate, at least for the next week, and until your symptoms are completely gone for 48 hours.
So if you're sick with COVID-19, there's a really good chance you're going to be all right by using over-the-counter medications to treat your symptoms.
Essentially, we just have them treat their symptoms with what they would normally take for a cold and flu, stuff that's readily available at your local pharmacy, with good instructions to come back if their symptoms get worse. So if they start developing really high fevers, they start getting short of breath, or they start developing chest pain, then they need to come back and let us check them out. And at that point, we would have to take some more significant measures. But for the vast majority of people, they should just be able to treat this with what you normally would treat a cold and flu.
Here's the thing about COVID-19 that you need to understand. Most people can contract SARS-CoV-2, develop COVID-19, and be okay. The mortality rate is relatively low for folks under 50 and healthy.
But here's the part you need to consider if you're asking yourself, what's the big deal about a disease I'm likely to survive? The big deal is actually 2 parts. The first part is all about the spread.
This is more virulent, and so it is more infectious, and it is more lethal than your common cold or flu. There's a value that's called the R naught that describes the infectivity of a particular agent.
The R naught value is a mathematical term that indicates how contagious an infectious disease is. It's also referred to as the reproduction number. As an infection spreads to new people, it reproduces itself. The R naught number tells you the average number of people who will catch a disease from one contagious person. It specifically applies to a population of people who were previously free of infection and haven't been vaccinated, like all of us. If a disease has an R naught value of 5, a person who has the disease will transmit it to an average of 5 other people in their community.
So the R naught value of flu, roughly between 1 and 1.2. The infectivity rate of this is somewhere between 1 and 2. We think it may be closer to 2, but some of that data is still coming in. Something like measles has infectivity rate that is significantly higher, but this is not something that we really should be waiting around to collect data on. I think we have enough data from all over the world to show us that this is going to be something bad, and this is something that if we don't take drastic measures for right now, is going to leave a lot of people dead, unfortunately.
So part 1 of what's the big deal about a disease I'm likely to survive is that the R naught value or reproduction rate is likely higher than the flu. We don't know exactly because we can't test for COVID-19 everywhere. The only people getting tested are folks with the worst symptoms, so it's very possible that the R naught value is way higher. Part 2 of what's the big deal about a disease I'm likely to survive? Well, it's not about you. It's about the population that is most vulnerable to the worst parts of this disease.
Initial reports indicated that it was people over 50 with respiratory issues that were most vulnerable, which is still true, but anyone with respiratory issues, regardless of age, is in danger of COVID-19. Young and old with compromised immune systems and pre-existing health issues are in the high-risk categories.
So you blow off the warnings and you go out. Don't wash your hands, contract the virus, go to work, give the virus to a coworker whose child is battling cancer. You might have just passed SARS-CoV-2 to a child with a compromised immune system, or to an elderly person on the bus going to their doctor's appointment, or maybe to your own parent or grandparent.
And if you're still thinking, what's the big deal about a disease I'm likely to survive? Think again.
I don't think you're out of the clear, even if you're a young, healthy person. We know, again, this just based on the data that's coming in, 2% of those that are hospitalized are kids. I think earlier today, some 7-year-old child was admitted and diagnosed with coronavirus here in our local area. I think the first person that was diagnosed here in New Jersey was a 32-year-old physician assistant. I think he's given a few interviews. He doesn't look too good, and we all hope he pulls out of this okay. But I think just because you're otherwise young and healthy and have no comorbidities, it does not make you immune to developing complications. Young healthy people are getting sick, and what we saw in China and other parts of the world, young healthy people did die. One of the first doctors to sort of sound the alarm in Wuhan actually died from this, and he was, as far as I know, a young healthy individual.
So we know this disease spreads fast and it's deadly. So how is the Department of Defense handling this crisis? To help us understand this question, we turn to reporter Elizabeth Howe from the online news organization Connecting Vets.
We're seeing more preventative measures across the Department of Defense now. The Air Force and Navy have barred the public from attending graduation ceremonies. The Army's Europe commander is working from home, and the Secretary of Defense is hosting meetings in the Pentagon by teleconferencing separate rooms together. So instead of having 30 people all in one room, he's got 10 in one, 10 in one, 10 in one, and they're teleconferencing the rooms together. These are just some of the things that are being implemented across the Department of Defense at different installations.
So the DoD is doing pretty much what the CDC and the World Health Organizations are recommending. teleconferencing, and minimizing large gatherings.
There haven't been any force-wide regulations passed down. At this time, it's up to each installation commander to implement whatever policies they deem necessary. There are also many installations that have been designated as quarantine sites. We've been seeing that from the very beginning. Most recently, 4 bases in California, Texas, and Georgia were designated as sites for the passengers leaving the Grand Princess cruise ship. That's the ship that's been being held off the coast of California.
Back in early February, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, in a memo, identified several military installations near 11 airports that would be used as tertiary locations for COVID-19 quarantine facilities. So HHS, the Health and Human Services, has a first and second resort already for housing quarantined individuals. The third resort are those identified military bases.
The Secretary of Defense wrote in his memo, quote, DoD personnel will not be in direct contact with the evacuees and will minimize contact with personnel supporting the evacuees. Should routine monitoring of evacuees identify ill individuals, HHS has procedures in place to transport them to a local civilian medical facility. HHS will also ensure that no evacuated personnel are transferred to any DoD installation if they are infected or ill.
There was a Pentagon press briefing on Monday to discuss the current state of the situation, and according to the Joint Staff Surgeon, the risk level is low. Not sure what that means exactly, but they wanted to be very clear about that, so he said, quote, to frame this from a medical standpoint, the immediate risk to our force remains low across the force, and I want to be very clear about that. We've had a handful of cases around the world. No one is seriously ill at this point. Everyone that has been diagnosed is being appropriately treated, getting the care that they need, end quote. Which is interesting because they're canceling operations, stalling PCS moves, and doing a lot of things that impact where military personnel are and how well they're trained. But the Pentagon officials have said that they're confident we can all continue to do our jobs while also practicing preventative measures.
The Army is looking at COVID-19 first and foremost from the position of how it affects the individual soldier. Like we said, healthy people under 50 are in a category that is not likely to develop complications from COVID-19 symptoms.
Not impossible, just unlikely. But remember, 2 parts, the spread or the not value, and it's not just about you. So, as far as direct impact, the Joint Staff Surgeon likely views the impact on operations and readiness as low, but the military isn't ignorant to how dangerous the virus is. That's why they're working hard to develop a vaccine.
As of Monday morning, the Department of Defense had 12 labs up and running, performing the test, and there were half a dozen active duty personnel who were being tested. They said they were being investigated for COVID-19, whatever investigated means. Those numbers are very likely to have already changed since then. However, haven't had an update from the Pentagon on how many active duty personnel have received positive results. They also wanted to clarify that the vaccine Walter Reed Army Institute of Research is working on is months away. It has to be developed, and then it has to go through human tests. So in the meantime, wash your hands, keep your distance.
What about our veteran population? This pandemic is occurring when there's talk about veterans potentially losing access to on-base doctors.
From the Veterans Affairs side, at least 6 veterans have tested positive for COVID-19. That's as of Monday, according to the Department of Veterans Affairs. On last Thursday, VA hospitals and nursing homes began restricting visitors and limiting guests, and they've also started screening all staff and patients who show symptoms. About half of VA patients are older than 65, which is the population most at risk for the infection, according to the CDC. VA released info this week about its virtual care visit capabilities through myhealth.va.gov. The release advised veterans with fevers, colds, coughs, and flu-like symptoms to use this resource. It includes secure messaging and video appointments. So instead of going into a doctor's office, veterans can use this resource. To even receive prescriptions from their doctors, the VA did emphasize that this service is not for emergency situations. Interestingly, VA plays a rather crucial role in all this. They are one of 4 federal agencies that are part of the National Disaster Medical System, along with the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and HHS. Together, those 4 agencies, should this be declared a national medical emergency, are responsible for deploying clinical staff and setting up mobile medical units. VA Secretary Robert Wilkie told members of Congress last week that VA trains for these situations year-round, they're testing processes and checking supplies as we speak.
With all the issues the VA has been trying to address, in addition, they're going through some internal leadership changes. It's going to be interesting, to say the least, to see how the VA can work with other agencies to fight COVID-19 while addressing the issues it already has. After the break, we'll talk with the author of World War Z, Max Brooks. What does a fictional zombie outbreak have to do with COVID-19? Are we really doing all that we can to fight this pandemic? And should you buy up all the medical masks and toilet paper you can get your hands on? I'm going to let you know right now, don't do that. But after the break, we'll tell you why you shouldn't.
This episode of Military Matters is brought to you by Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes provides independent news and information to the U.S. military community, including active duty service members, DoD civilians, veterans, contractors, and their families. Unique among Department of Defense authorized news outlets, Stars and Stripes is governed by the principles of the First Amendment. No slants, no agendas, just the news.
Use promo code podcast and save 50% on your digital subscription.
Go to stripes.com and see the difference for yourself. That's stripes.com.
When your orders come in and it's time to make a plan to move or store your personally owned vehicle, International Auto Logistics is here as the #1 resource for U.S. service members' POV needs. Just use their website to get started at www.pcsmypov.com to get all of the information you'll need on storing and picking up your vehicle. Or check out the just launched IAL mobile app. Just search for PCS My POV in the Apple Store or on Google Play. World War Z is hands down one of my favorite books. If you haven't read it, you're likely familiar with the film of the same name starring Brad Pitt. What made the book so interesting to me was how serious and honest the author took the zombie virus and its spread. Since writing World War Z, author Max Brooks has worked with the CDC and the military to bring his insight from the fictional world of zombies to the world of COVID-19.
Well, this was crazy. Back in January, I was laid up with the flu. Even though I'd had a flu shot, thank God, it could have been a lot worse. But in those few days I was recovering, I got an email from Admiral Phil Weisskopf. And Admiral Weisskopf was the president of the Naval War College when World War Z came out. And he put World War Z on the reading list there. So he was my introduction into the modern military. He brought me in to talk. And from that, got me speaking at strategic studies groups and now got me the fellowship at the Modern War Institute at West Point. So Admiral Weisskopf sent me this email about coronavirus in China. And he said, have you seen this? And as I started to look at it, I realized, oh God, this is really bad. Because when I wrote World War Z, I based it on SARS. That's why I put my zombie plague in China, because to have a plague really get out of control, it's not enough to have a massive population. You need a first-rate infrastructure. That's the next thing you need. That's why so many African diseases haven't wiped us out yet. They can't get out of the jungle. They get to a village. They stay in the village long enough for help to come. So China is the perfect storm. Massive population. A large amount of that population is recently urbanized. It has a hyperspeed infrastructure, transportation network, but the most important thing is a government willing to suppress the truth. That's the most important part of a plague. And that's why SARS got out of control. And that's why I put my fictional zombie plague there. But I had imagined we had learned our lesson. I wasn't looking forward. I was looking back. And suddenly, here we are again, 100, 1,000 times worse than SARS.
Unlike a zombie outbreak, COVID-19 feels almost invisible. We don't see the streets full of shuffling COVID-19 infected semi-humans. Instead, victims of the disease are nameless numbers and statistics on maps of the United States and the world showing areas with infection.
In the book World War Z, the governments of the world are slow to react to the growing threat of a virus. It's only after it's gotten out of control that there's a sense of urgency to regain control. At its core, the book is about a national security threat that isn't taken seriously.
I think this has to be a huge wake-up call for the gutting of our national security. When you talk about these carriers, about evacuation from sea.
One of the ways that civilians are evacuated overseas in the zombie world is by aircraft carriers and other naval ships.
This is the problem. We have gutted our merchant fleets, because right now it's all about the bottom line. It's all about profits. It's the same thing with disaster logistics. I was at the United States Homeland Security nuclear scenario, Vibrant Response. And I was told by a very high-ranking member of the Defense Logistics Agency that we have absolutely removed all our stockpiling. Up until the end of the Cold War, we used to have warehouses everywhere with emergency supplies in case we got nuked. The good news was if there was a tornado or an earthquake, boom, you got those supplies ready to go. Those warehouses are gone because it was expensive to keep them. So now we do a thing where we buy our emergency supplies on the day of the crisis from the big box stores. But here's a little tidbit nobody knows about. Those big box stores, they don't have warehouses either. They have to turn their stock over every 24 hours. So there's no back room at the Walmart, which means if we have a crisis, and God forbid the crisis interrupts the flow of same-day delivery that basically is our economy, we've got nothing. That's the problem. It's the same thing for ships. A year ago, I wrote an article about this, I believe it was South Korea's merchant fleet. They had too many, they laid them off. Well, what if we needed those ships to evacuate South Korean civilians on the dawn of the next Korean War? We need to be able to not be so greedy and take a percentage of our wealth and just put it aside for stuff that we might need in a crisis.
This issue of the U.S. being in a state of being ill-prepared to handle a pandemic, according to Max, comes down to policies that have been around long before this administration and what could be considered a national mindset that national security isn't important to the average citizen anymore.
I'm going to say two things that may be a little controversial. I would say that we might not have the most competent captain behind this ship of state right now, but I will say that that ship of state has been gutted for many years before this captain ever came aboard. As much as this current captain is to blame, I think, for causing unnecessary panic, I think that the gutting of our institutions like the CDC and also public health in this country, you can't lay that all on the steps of the White House. We've been doing this for years and years and years. And I think part of that is the ground up. I think part of that is we have a generation now, the grandparents. America's grandparents have grown up vaccinated. So they don't have that gut reaction to disease the way my parents and my grandparents did. It would have been incomprehensible in my parents' day to not vaccinate their children. And so I think that fear has left the public consciousness, which then gives our leaders authority to gut the CDC, not invest in hospitals, doctors, nutrition programs, good nutrition programs. And honestly, I think part of that is a much bigger picture. Part of that is the divorce of the American people from national security. At the end of World War II, we had a wholeness of nation concept, like Israel still has. Everything from physical fitness programs in schools to nutrition programs to education, everything was based on the fact that we may have to go to war again and everyone's going to have to do their part. And for the last half a century, we've been dismantling that. And now we are reaping a bitter crop.
That bitter crop that Max is talking about is related to knowing this virus was coming weeks, even months in advance, as stories came trickling, then flooding out of China.
Hindsight is really important here because the virus isn't Ebola and it isn't smallpox. Those are stack the bodies outside kinds of diseases that won't stay invisible for long. In many ways, COVID-19 can be seen as a dress rehearsal for something way worse to come.
One of the biggest problems with COVID-19 has been the messaging. In one hand, we have "it's fine, no worse than a cold, wash your hands, you'll be okay." But on the other hand, we're locking down the entire country of Italy. So is the lockdown of an entire country panic or a reasonable precaution? Is just telling folks to wash their hands and they'll be okay a form of denial?
And this is why we have to be very careful to not tip in either way between denial and panic, because panic comes from too much denial. When you don't prepare, you don't educate, you stick your head in the ground long enough, then you stick your head up and look around and it's too late and you're unprepared. That's why people panic. So right now, our best weapon is education. And as with all my writings, I go to history. I look right back on history because I lived through a plague. I'm 47. I lived through AIDS. And we stopped AIDS from wiping this country out with public education. We still don't have a vaccine. We still don't have a way to take care of it, really. If you've got it, you can keep it at bay for the rest of your life. But when I was a kid, we had nothing. What we did have was an Amish admiral-looking guy called C. Everett Koop. He was the Surgeon General. He was on TV, it seemed to me, every night. And we sent out a pamphlet to every single American home, educating them about AIDS. Here's how it's transmitted. Here's how you can stop it. Boom. And we did. We didn't wipe it out, but we kept it at bay. And I think right now, public education, calm, clear facts is what's going to keep us safe.
Dr. Kalsi.
I think we should have a healthy level of fear. I don't think it helps anybody to panic, but I do think there should be a healthy element of fear in all of this. And, that fear stems from not knowing. We could have potentially gotten ahead of this thing and collected enough data to determine, the infectivity rate, get a good handle on the lethality rate, and so that we could make better projections and better models. But now we will have to be reactive instead of being proactive, and we'll just have to mitigate the tide of infections that is headed our way. We only have maybe about 100,000 ventilators roughly in the US. So if you do the math, we will not have enough ventilators to take care of the people that are sick, that will become sick from all these infections. So a lot more people will die unnecessarily because we just simply won't have the medical resources to help them. Italy is going to see that probably sometime next week, where their medical resources will be overcome. And I think we are probably, if I had to guess, we're probably 4 to 6 weeks away from something like that, where we just won't have the medical resources to save the very, very sick people, because our ICUs are all basically already full with flu cases. So that's what's sort of scary about it. With a little preparation, I think we could have potentially pushed off this pandemic, maybe pushed it to the right a little when our ICU beds would have been a little more available.
There are lots of talking heads out there. Most of them reside in your social media feed. There are people making signs, memes, and videos telling you what you should think about this disease.
Listen to the quiet professionals. Do not listen to anyone who might have political skin in the game and is either going to gin up panic or going to suppress the real facts because they don't want to lose political points. Listen to the doctors, listen to the scientists, listen to the institutions. The CDC, they're doing the best they can. I listen to them. I listen to the World Health Organizations. I listen to the Surgeon General. These are the folks that I get my facts from. Because the problem is panic can tip over very, very easily. And by the way, this whole thing in Yonkers, the idea of the army breaking because they're hearing terror.
In World War Z, a breakdown in the morale of troops fighting the infected zombies occurs when the systems designed for soldiers to communicate rapidly and to share information becomes the mechanism by which they witness their sister units being eaten alive by these zombies.
I didn't just make that up. Part of that came from a wonderful novel called Red Army, written by Captain Ralph Peters, about Ivan attacking NATO in the 1980s. And I'm just going to spoil it. Here we go. They win by building an entire West German town, rebuilding it somewhere in the Soviet Union, right down to the window panes, and then burning it, and then filming it and broadcasting that on West German television. And the West Germans see that and they freak out and they sue for peace and they break up NATO. That's how Ivan wins, not with an ocean of T-80 tanks. And so I think right now, information is our best weapon against COVID-19.
I don't know that the right people are freaking out about it. We are probably where we are today is I think where Italy was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. So we've got some sporadic people popping up with positive tests. We don't have enough tests to actually test, and the only tests that are being used are the ones on the sickest patients. So the number of infections is actually way underreported. Based on the numbers that we have, it seems like we have anywhere from a 3 to 5% lethality rate here in the U.S. And we are, we spend the most healthcare dollars in the world, and we have supposedly the most modern medical system, and we're failing. We're absolutely failing on this response here.
So what happens next? What can we expect from the next couple of days or weeks?
I honestly don't know. I think this week is going to be very telling. This week and the next week will be very telling, because that's when the test kits are going to start to make their way throughout the country. Because right now we're fighting a war and the enemy's microscopic. And in every war, you need good intel. And we are really deep in the fog of war right now. We simply don't know how far this disease has spread. We are not able to track it. We don't know who has it. I do think we're taking some good proactive measures, like canceling big social events. And I don't know if we have to cancel the little ones, the local ones. We might have to, but I do think big conventions like the ones I was supposed to go to. Listen, I have a book coming out in 2 months. I was literally about to launch it at Emerald City Con this week. I wrote a Bigfoot book, and I am not allowed to go to Bigfoot's house in Seattle and talk about it. I pulled out, and then 2 days later, the con was canceled. South by Southwest is canceled. I was about to go to History Con at the end of April, canceled. Until we know more, I don't think that's such a bad idea to cancel especially international events. People coming from all over the world, cramming in and then going home. That's a great way to spread diseases.
This is just my opinion. So it doesn't represent the position of DOD, or is this just me? So we are definitely not doing all that we can do. We should be instituting targeted quarantines, and if not, perhaps broader, more coordinated quarantines. We don't have a handle on which medications actually work to treat this, although some of that data is coming in. We know that about 5% of people that will get sick with this will be in critical care or will need some sort of critical care. And if you just do the math, we think that this is going to be probably a little more infectious, have a little bit higher infectivity rate compared to the flu. And it may have a lethality rate of anywhere from 0.5 to maybe close to 3%. That's hundreds of thousands of people that will be needing a ventilator, and hundreds of thousands of people that potentially will die. Maybe millions on some of the most dire projections.
COVID-19 is a serious threat leaders at all levels are beginning to take very seriously. Washington, D.C. just declared a state of emergency, as have California, Maryland, Utah, Kentucky, New York, Oregon, Florida, North Carolina, Colorado, Washington State, Massachusetts, and New Jersey.
So the World Health Organization declared a pandemic, and we have multiple states of emergency. What can we do? What can you do that's within your power?
First, let's talk about what not to do. Let's talk about surgical masks and toilet paper.
If you're sick, then you should wear a mask, because that will help keep the virus out of the air when you cough, and it'll help reduce the aerosolization of the virus when you cough. But for the general public, I don't think the masks really are very helpful. I don't think they really work all that well. especially when you're not shown or trained how to wear them or fit them. I don't think the general public really needs to wear these. I think we should leave them for healthcare personnel and other folks that are at very, very high risk. And we are facing shortages of these masks and other personal protective equipment. Don't hoard toilet paper. Our civilization and our society will go on, and this is just another bump in the road. Things are going to be okay, but we really do need to get the ball rolling on this larger coordinated effort. And I do strongly feel that mass quarantines is one of those weapons that we have against this threat, to which we currently have no vaccine and no proven treatment.
We can treat the symptoms, but we don't have a treatment for the disease itself or a vaccine.
You've heard it before, but here it is again. Wash your hands, try not to touch your face, stay away from gatherings. In fact, try to stay home and avoid travel. And take this seriously. This isn't some overblown political gambit. Real lives are on the line, and you can make a real difference just by following those simple rules of hygiene. It's not just about hoping for the best. It's about taking real action so that you can make the best happen.
I think we can hope for the best, right? We can hope that this is really only as bad as the flu, in which case maybe we'll see a death rate on the order of about 30 to 60,000 people. But I don't think public policy should be pinned on hopes and dreams. I think public policy has you have a higher responsibility, and you can't just simply wish that things are better or hope that things are going to get better. You have to have a plan of attack, right? You would never go into battle thinking, gosh, I hope the enemy doesn't come over that hill, because that would really, really suck. That would just, we would not have prepared for that.
I think that the military, and this is going to be really hard. I think that the military needs to take a good, long, hard look on germ warfare. Because if I were the enemy and I wanted to take out the U.S. military, and when I say take out, I don't mean having to kill them. I mean removing the U.S. military from the world stage. Germs is how I would do it. Because we've shown the world in 1991, don't screw with us. In the Prussian mechanized battlefield, Desert Storm showed the world, if you meet us on the battlefield, we'll annihilate you. We thought we scared the world off. What we did was taught them not to meet us on the battlefield. We taught them to be asymmetric. And so that's why the rest of the world, while we're still building big, shiny World War II style military weapons, they're investing in proxy wars, intelligence wars, and possibly germ wars. Because for me, the best way is to remove the US military is to start a germ attack. Maybe not even within the ranks, maybe at home. You try to keep unit cohesion when your soldiers are getting emails back home that their children are sick. We know, especially the Russians, are so good at synchronized asymmetric warfare. If I was working for the GRU, I wouldn't have to spread a plague in America. I would have to spread disinformation about that plague. Because think about it now. If I'm sitting in my little basement in Dzerzhinsky Square, I didn't spread COVID-19 around the world, but all I have to do is plant some very carefully crafted messages on social media that COVID-19 is mutating and it is starting to kill children, and the government doesn't want you to know. Our enemies are going to exploit this if we're not careful. And that's why we really need to get a handle on unified messaging and strict, orthodox adherence to the scientific facts. Because if we don't, then our enemies will use this against us.
We hope you walk away from this episode empowered with knowledge and a sense of understanding of this disease.
I want to thank Dr. Kalsi for his tremendous work on the front lines in the ER against a virus that has so much potential to harm not just us, but him as well. I don't know if you could tell, but he was tired when we conducted our interview. I could hear the strain over his voice. There are thousands of medical professionals out there fighting this fight right now. So listen to what they're telling us. Listen what they're telling you. They've got boots on the ground and they're trying to guide us all through this very trying time.
We also want to thank Max Brooks and Elizabeth Howe for contributing to this episode, their expertise and research.
To learn more about Elizabeth Howe and Connecting Vets, go to connectingvets.com. There you'll find articles, podcasts, and links to the veteran news that matters to you. Max talked about information warfare, and he said something that really resonated with me, considering Stars and Stripes is currently on the budget chopping block.
I think Stars and Stripes is one of the most important weapons the U.S. military has in its arsenal. In an age of gray zone warfare, hybrid warfare, information warfare, we need Stars as Stripes as certainly as we need all the tanks and artillery and aircraft carriers and B-1Bs. We need to fight misinformation propagated from our enemies, and our enemies are a decade ahead of us. Losing Stars and Stripes would be like losing NORAD on the eve of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
This was a special edition of Military Matters. Military Matters is available everywhere you can find podcasts. We're also at stripes.com. Go to stripes.com, use promo code podcast, and get 50% off your digital subscription to Stars and Stripes Online. Go to stripes.com, use promo code podcast, and get 50% off.
Thank you to our sponsor, International Auto Logistics. Go to pcsmypov.com to get all of the information you'll need on storing and picking up your vehicle. Or check out the just-launched IAL mobile app. Just search for PCS My POV in the Apple Store or on Google Play. This was Military Matters. Follow us on Twitter at StripesMMPod. I'm also on Twitter at RodPodRod, and you can find Desmon at DPodFarris. All the links and social media will be in the show notes. This episode was written and produced by me, Rod Rodriguez. Additional production assistance by Desmond Farris. Executive producer, Benjamin Bateman. This was a Stars and Stripes production. Keep listening to hear more about Max Brooks' new book, Devolution. Follow Max on Twitter at MaxBrooksAuthor. We'll see you at the next episode.
Well, the premise is, and this goes right back to what I do with all my books, is facts first. The premise is that there is a very high-tech, high-end eco-community in the Cascade Mountains. And it's sort of the new Levittown. It's the new model for how we should all live. With solar panels, telecommuting, drone deliveries of groceries, smart homes that basically, if something breaks, the home knows, it sends a signal, the handyman comes in his electric driverless van, boom. So you could essentially have all the comforts of the Upper East Side of Manhattan and live in the middle of the wilderness. And it's a wonderful way of living until Mount Rainier erupts. And so not only are our community members stranded, they're forgotten because the volcano blows out in the direction of Seattle, causes one of the greatest natural disasters in American history. So they are totally forgotten, and winter is coming. And like I said, these are highly educated, highly paid David Sedaris fans who don't know how to change a light bulb. They don't even have a toolkit. So they have to learn how to try and survive and prepare for the winter. And that is the least of their problems, because the volcano has also driven a pack of very large, very hungry Sasquatch creatures out of their traditional hunting grounds. And winter is coming, and they need to stock up calories for the winter, and they come up against what is essentially a pen of sheep. So these people have to not only try to survive, but fight for their lives with no weapons of any kind. You can always follow me on Max Brooks Author on Twitter, and I've got Devolution, the novel, which is coming out on May 12th. You can actually pre-order it on Amazon right now. And apparently what's so cool about Amazon is if they reduce the price, they reduce what you've already bought it for. So thank you, Amazon.